Thank you very much, everybody, for your patience this evening with me while I got myself situated as chair and just deciding a path forward on how we're going to approach the rest of this evening. Councillor Peterson, I believe, is ready with a motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would move that we amend the existing agenda to defer the 10.2, the urban hen bylaw, to next Wednesday council meeting? No, just to defer
June
it?
5th?
Okay, so that we will defer it, just defer it to a future time, and that we will take 7.3 CAO Council Dialogue under FOIP Section 24 off the agenda, and that just a second, and that council defer discussion, on 7.3, we did that. And then we move the consent agenda. Can I move into that? Or do we have to vote on the amendment first? Let's vote on the amendment.
Amendment
And I can
first,
move the consent agenda.
So does everyone understand?
So again, I just go through one more time. So we're keeping 7.2 medical services in camera.
Yes,
We're keeping consent agenda.
yes,
We're keeping 10.1 property tax rate bylaw.
yes,
We're cutting urban hen.
yes.
And I think we would also need to create a new closed period at the end of the meeting.
Yeah, that's right, Your Worship, just clarifying, are we deferring the conversation around 7.2 to the end of the meeting?
Yes, and 7.2 will be moved to the end of the meeting. Yes, thank you.
Creating section
Yes.
14 and to item 14.1.
So motion by the committee, does that work for legislative services?
What are we doing for
Does the chair accept?
I accept the motion as long as the motion is understood by council, and I think, well, it might be messy, I think we're all on the same page.
Call the question.
I'll call the question, seeing no further discussion. All in favor? All opposed?
Your Worship, I would move that we extend the meeting to 10:30.
Any conversation, discussion, questions? No, seeing none, all in favor?
And Your Worship,
All
I would
opposed?
move the consent agenda, that council adopt recommendations of the following agenda reports by an omnibus motion. 9.1, regular council minutes, May 1, 2024. 11.1, Alberta Municipalities Resolution 2024, Alberta First Responders Radio Communication System, Equipment Funding. 11.2, Canadian Overnight Repo Rate Average CORA Transition. 11.3, Corporate Strategic Plan and Financial Quarterly Report, Q4 2023. 11.4, Proclamation World Family Doctor Day. 13.1, Sacred Heart Church Dedication Mass Invitation.
Thank you very much, Councillor. All hearing the motion, comments? Councillor Wiley.
Sorry, I have to ask that 11.2 be removed from the
Yeah,
omnibus.
and to put onto a future agenda. I'm
And
fine
put-
with that.
And can I, amend to remove 11.2 and add to a future agenda?
Yeah, I'm good with that amendment.
Administration, does that sound?
Thank you, Your Worship. I
No,
think
just move it as amended.
administration would probably request that we remove that item from the consent agenda, then make a separate motion to
Yeah.
defer that to a future meeting.
Or we can't just move the consent agenda as amended?
You can move the consent agenda with that item.
So I would move I would change my motion to move the consent agenda with 11.2 removed and deferred to a future meeting.
No, he said
First,
don't. rem-
sorry, as I understand it, administration would like us to move the consent agenda with 11.2 removed.
Yes.
And then in a separate motion, make a motion to defer it to a
All
future
right,
meeting.
I'm good with
Just for
that.
cleanliness. So the motion we have in front of us, just to clarify, is to move the consent agenda, items 9.1, 11.1, 11.3, 11.4, and 13.1, as amended to remove 11.2. Any discussion or questions regarding the motion? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor? And the motion has passed.
Okay, I'd like to move that 11.2 be deferred to a future agenda.
Everyone's heard the motion. Is there any comments or discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor? The motion is carried.
I'd like to make another motion that we schedule a special council meeting for next Wednesday to clean up some of the backlog of business that hasn't been dealt with so that administration can sort out.
Councillor Wiley, should we ask administration if there's room on the June 5th agenda first? Because there might be.
Administration?
I believe that there's room based on agenda planning to put everything off to the 5th, but I will actually defer to Jonathan because I don't have the 5th agenda in front of me, but I don't remember it. Like I think it's something that we could easily deal with the urban hen bylaw, for example, could be put into that agenda without running it too late. So, but Jonathan, do you have any comment?
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, CASCO. We're just waiting on Jonathan.
Thank you, Your Worship. My apologies. My computer took a little bit of time there to load. The June 5th agenda would have space to put on the urban hen bylaw. And 11.2, yes, the Canadian overnight repo rate average transition.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor for a special meeting of council next Wednesday. Feedback we've received from administration is that there is sufficient time on the June 5th agenda for our regular council meeting to include the items that have been deferred tonight. With that information, does anyone have any comments or questions regarding the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? And the motion has been defeated. So, that being said, we will carry on with the agenda as we have amended multiple times to 10.1, 2024 Property Rate Tax Bylaw number 24-08. Leanna, will you be starting us off today?
I will be.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience with us this evening.
And that's okay. I'm going to get Claudette to pull up the PowerPoint for me. So F5, please. Perfect, thank you. Next slide, please. So I'd like to start off by thanking each of you for your diligence in ensuring that we're continuing to follow our strategic plan and following proper budget procedures. I know we've had to face some difficult decisions of the past couple budget cycles, and I don't see any that are going to be coming easy for us with our economy as it is right now. Council passed the 2024 operating capital budgets on December 6, 2023. At this time, the annual property tax increase was forecasted to be 5.2% for both residential and non-residential properties. After receiving our requisitions, administration has put in front of you two alternatives. When we do our budgets, we always include what we are anticipating for our requisitions. In 2024, we had estimated that our requisition total would be $5.9 million, but when we actually received our requisitions, it came in at $6.2 million, an increase of $290,000. Next slide, please. So what we have put in front of you tonight is we have a municipal tax budget of $16.012 million. We have our education of $5.814 million. Our seniors requisition at $243,000 for a total tax of $22 million and change. What we have done, or what we are asking council, is in 2023, when we did our operating budget, we had overestimated what some of our requisitions were going to come in. So with doing proper processes, we came back to council and said, well, we overestimated, so we'd like to transfer this money to reserves. So council agreed in 2023 that we transferred $202,000 to reserves for our overestimations in our requisitions. So what we are asking council to do tonight is moving from the 5.2% of what our total tax budget was originally passed at, to be looking at a 5.9% average by transferring $130,000 from reserves. Next slide, please. As you see here on this slide, we have our municipal taxes. Our budget was an increase of 6.7%. Our municipal taxes are still 6.7%. We see our education going from estimating a potential of 1.6% increase to a 3.6% increase. With the transfer of 130,000 from reserves. You see our seniors requisition, we had estimated at 206,000, and when we got our total requisitions of $243,000. Overall, it went from 5.2 to 5.9. So I want council to kind of have some discussion if this is acceptable to them on passing our property tax bylaw at the 5.9%. Otherwise, we can talk about other alternatives. Any questions from council?
I'll open up the floor to councillors for questions. Councillor Wiley.
My question is just a question to clarify for anyone in the public at home. So what you're saying is council really has, as you said, a difficult decision to make tonight. We are
Correct,
looking
yeah.
at raising municipal taxes from what we had previously hoped at 5.2% increase to a 5.9% increase. The alternative to that is to start going into our reserves, which are our savings. And so the two both seem like very difficult decisions. Am I understanding that correctly? The two options.
You are, but I want to clarify, it's not the municipal taxes that have gone up, it is our total tax.
Total tax. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you.
If I might add to Councillor Wiley, so there is an ask for 130,000 from reserves for the 5.9. If council wanted a lower tax rate, it would be withdrawing more than that from the reserves.
Yeah. And just for the public's knowledge, our reserves, after 2.5 years of saving, are finally starting to look like something that I personally feel is a healthy amount of savings for a municipality to have. And if we were to start cutting into the reserves, I would find that an alarming number too. So as has been said, both options are very difficult.
Any other comments or questions from councillors? Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you. This question comes up usually annually. What is a dollar value of a 1% increase going for nowadays? Like I think last year was 200,000 roughly.
I believe it was 180 to 200,000 was a 1% increase.
Okay.
I apologize. I don't have that number right on it at my fingertips with the change in the requisitions.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from councillors? Councillor Peterson.
So I'm just wondering, Leanna, if you can speak to council's borrowing to finance capital projects to offset tax increases.
This would be a position that council would need to take. There's a number of, I'm going to speak a little bit more loosely. There's a number of processes that we do need to follow on if we're going to borrow for capital projects. we do have to advertise and give our residents basically a 30-day appeal period, wanting to say yes or no, if they want to do that. The one thing is, all that does is it spreads out the time that we're paying for it. So right now, say we have a $2 million project, and I'm going to speak very loosely on a $2,000 project, and we're going to finance it over 10 years. So that's what, $200,000 a year plus interest. So you have to pay the principal portion back plus the interest. And right now, our interest rates are not near what they were when we have been borrowing in the past. I remember times when we were borrowing between 1.5% and 3%. And right now, if we went to the market, we'd be looking at about 6% to borrow.
No, I
And-
wasn't. So the borrowing from the local authorities is at 6%?
It 5.8 to 6, it changes quite frequently. And the next time we hear from the Bank of Canada what they're doing with their rates, they change probably every 15 days.
Yeah, I just-
Councillor Peterson, I looked at it the other day. I think it was a 20-year debenture was 5.6%, if
It
I
is
remember correctly.
5.6, yeah. And so what is the interest that we're making on our reserves right now?
In my best guesstimate, not having the numbers in front of me, I'd say probably between 3.5 and 4.
Thank you. So my concern on the 5.9, so first of all, this council has stepped away from doing sort of 3-year projections in budgeting, and there are reasons for that. But when we last did a 3-year projection, it was before this council sat behind this table, and I think we did a 3-year projection at 4.5, 4.3 or 4.5%. And so now we're asking 5.9. So for people who were planning to budget accordingly to that, taking that hit of a 1.6 is significant. I understand that when we did a 0% tax increase during COVID, that this is now paying the piper on that. I understand that. But I also am just so reluctant to go with a 5.9. To me, if I would take the $202,000 out of reserves extremely reluctantly and go with a 5.6% increase, which is more palatable off the 5.2 to the 5.6 and a 5.2 to a 5.9. And I know it's splitting hairs, but at this point, I know particularly for businesses, especially with extraordinary overhead, this is a burdensome tax rate at any rate. So I would go with the lesser. I would go with the 5.6, and I would transfer the $202,000 from reserves. And I know, the reason that I'm saying this is that I understand clearly that if we have a catastrophic infrastructure failure, that going to our reserves would also be catastrophic. But I also want to point out that we are in a better position, this council is in a better position to borrow money than any council has been, at least definitely in my decade here. And according to what I have heard from Mayor Fuel, from councilors even before, we were at 68.7% of our borrowing capacity, I believe, in 2013. And I believe, I would go to Liana to this, but we're around 30% now. So we do have capacity to counter any kind of catastrophic incident that might happen. We're in a decent financial position to be able to protect our community in terms of capacity to borrow if we had to. And knowing that, we can move forward with less of a tax rate than we're currently anticipating at the 5.9.
But I actually had attached, the 5.9% tax rate increase to start the discussion. I believe
And I
that,
see that, Leanna. It's on page 48, and I
Yeah.
certainly see that you've provided both, and I thank you for that.
Counselor
so
Montgomery.
Claudette,
Oh,
oh, I'm
go right
sorry.
ahead, Leanna.
I was going to say to Claudette, if she'd like to, she could go to the next slide. So at the 5.9%, you see that on an average ratepayer, you're going to have a tax bill of $3,626. That is on an average ratepayer having an assessed value of $428,700. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is the same slide for the 5.9, but at the 5.6, pulling the 202,000 out of reserves. Next slide, please. And next slide. What you're doing to the average ratepayer is you've lessened the burden of, I think it was 3626 for a total tax bill, going to 3614. So not significant, but remember, this is everybody's proportionate share. So this was our second alternative where we would have to change our request to transfer instead of the $130,000 from the financial stabilization reserve, but to the 202,100. So,
Thank you, Leanna. I have Counselor Montgomery for questions next.
okay,
Thank you. So I actually, like, I agree with Councillor Peterson. It would be a good idea to try to minimize the increase, especially, well, with all things being considered, the way people are being stretched nowadays. So I think it's worth pointing out that in what you have under the seniors housing tax or the seniors requisition, so only 145,000 of that is actually what we're obligated to pay, and we have 99,000 or almost $100,000 that we are basically just talking about setting aside for possibly giving them next year. And so I think that, you know, like that's essentially a 0.5% increase right there that we could, you know, so just so for the public's knowledge, so Wheatland Housing has basically asked for $100,000 kind of upfront, when we are actually like obligated to pay them for basically what they spend, like after they've spent it. So it wouldn't be like we're shortchanging Wheatland Housing or anything like that. You know, we would be fulfilling our obligations, and you know, we could still, you know, and like that money could even come from, you know, like throughout the year if like, you know, there's kind of a budget surplus or something like that, you know, that could kind of come from that. But we can knock off another 0.5% essentially, maybe even a tiny bit more, you know, 0.5, 0.6%. That would get us down to the 5% that we're, you know, hoping to be around. So that's what I would suggest in addition to what Councillor Peterson is talking about.
Any other questions or comments from council or from administration? Counselor Peterson.
I think what Councilor Montgomery's talking about is the amount of money that Wheatland Housing assessed on for reserves. And so he is correct that council has a choice as to whether or not to pay that when the requisition comes in. And so reserves are set aside based on a number of factors. In this particular case, the reserves were set for a roof for the existing building, and under the Seniors Housing Act, the provincial government sets aside a policy that indicates that housing authorities should set aside reserves when it's necessary to do so. And then municipalities decide on whether or not they're going to pay that money that goes into reserves. But in the case of Wheatland Housing, just in this a cautionary tale, if we have to pay for the roof, then Wheatland Housing would take the money out of their reserves to do that. That would become a deficit financing perspective, and then the requisition for Town of Strathmore would simply, that would be added to with the next requisition. So Councilor Montgomery is correct. You could defer it, but it would eventually catch up.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Any other comments or questions regarding the kind of two options that have been presented to us, or perhaps an option not discussed? Hearing and seeing none, is anyone ready with a motion this evening to make a decision between, so what I see before us are two options. Option number one, just to summarize where we kind of are for everyone at home. Option number one would, and I'm summarizing here, result in an overall tax increase of 5.9% and involve a $130,000 transfer from reserves. Option two that we have in front of us this evening is an overall tax increase of 5.6% with $202,100 being transferred from reserves to lower that. I'm ready to hear from anyone. Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you.
Sorry, just to, so one thing to note, sorry to interrupt you, Councillor Montgomery, but just one thing that I'd like, that I think is worth mentioning at this moment is that both of these options have an associated drafted bylaw to them. If we were to go and explore a potential third option, that would mean that we could not address this item tonight, as another bylaw would need to be drafted and put in front of council to deliberate and decide on. So that would, and given the timing restrictions that we have, that would force us into deciding on a special council meeting, I believe so. So it just to kind of keep that in perspective, if we're going to go for an unwritten option 3, then that is something that those are additional considerations that council will have to
So
decide.
for clarification, number 24.8 is the 5.9% increase. But beginning on page 44 is a 24.13, which is the 5.6% tax increase.
That is correct. Councillor Montgomery, thank you for your patience.
Oh, no, that's okay. Thank you. Leanna, I just have a question for you, and this is just for clarity. So under option number, well, both options really, it mentions how it says residential 6.7, non-residential 6.7, and then overall 5.6. Would you just explain how it kind of gets to that 5.6, please?
Oh, sure. Claudette, can you go back one slide, please? So looking at the 5.6, our total taxes, and this is using the 243,000 for our seniors requisition. We have municipal of 16 million. We've got our education tax at the 5.7 after we've pulled out at the 5.6% is we're pulling out $202,000 from reserves. And then we have our designated industrial properties, which are a very small portion, gives us a grand total of 5.6, and it's all based on your assessed values.
Okay, thank you.
if I might just chime in with a question, just to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. On the summary of options that were given on page 48 here that I'm looking at,
Okay.
residential and non-residential both stay at 6.7% in both scenario. And that's because the transfer from reserves is not being applied to the municipal tax rate, because our municipal taxes haven't changed. It's being applied to the requisitions, which is why we're seeing the reduction in the overall percentage, but no change in residential or non-residential. Have I understood that correctly?
The only way that you can change your residential, non-residential, and municipal is how you split. So, with the MGA, you can actually tax your non-residential or your commercial properties at 5 times the 5 to 1. The provincial average is 1.5 percent non-res to res. What is presented here is 1.43, I believe it is, for what the non-res is compared to the residential. And that is the only way that you can change the split or how the municipal taxes are. Council made the decision back in December that we were going to collect just over $16 million in municipal taxes. What we have very little control over is the education requisition, the seniors requisition, and the designated industrial requisition. As you see, the designated industrial requisition is like $5,000. So it's a drop in the bucket. Normally, what you would do with your requisitions is you would figure out what the assessment is based on those, and it would be a flow through. So we tax $5 million, we pay out $5 million. But because we overestimated in 2023, we put away $202,000 into reserves because our overestimation on our education portion. We have the opportunity that we could apply or pull the 202 because we've earmarked it. That's in our financial stabilization reserve to go against our education requisition. Is this something normally that we do? No. But because we had overestimated in 2023 and we made a wise decision by saving the money to put it towards a rainy day. And I believe 2024 is our rainy day with our education. This is why we have presented option B.
Thank you very much. Any further comments or questions from councillors or motions? Councillor Wiley.
I'm ready with the motion.
I'm ready to hear it, sir.
All right. I'll be owning this one. The council give first reading to bylaw, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. We're going to start with this. The council, oh, no, that's reminding me to pick up my kids. Let's try this. Sorry, I'm planning to go ahead and move bylaw number 2413, but it looks to me like the order here then would require that for this first one, it's going to need to say financial stabilization reserve by 2,100. So for legislation, can I just read it in as 2,100?
Thank you, Worship Council. Yeah, you can just amend the operating budget as per
Perfect.
that, yeah.
Okay, so here's my motion. The council amend the 2024 operating budget by increasing the transfer from the financial stabilization reserve by 202,100 to offset the increase in the education requisition.
All right, we have a motion on the table, and I'm ready for discussion and questions.
Yeah, I'll just
Councillor
start with,
Peterson.
sorry.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Wiley. Go right ahead.
I was just going to say what every single person who's listening to this is thinking. Tax increases are brutal. it's tough. And so just so everyone's clear at home, the education requisition came in 300,000 more than we were considering. I know most people are sitting with their arms crossed and their frowny faces on, going, why can't that council just stop their spending problem? In this case, it's from the province of Alberta. So the question before us then is what to do with this problem. And so I think administration has given us a way forward where we're using some of our spending and also increasing some revenue through property tax. And it's a hard one, but I think this is the right balance.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley. Any other comments or questions from council? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion is carried unanimously. Councillor Wiley?
I'm ready with the next motion. The council give first reading to bylaw 2413, being the 2024 property tax rate bylaw.
Thank you very much. And as it's first reading, I'll just go straight to calling the question. All in favor? The motion's carried unanimously.
Hey, my name's been forever attached to those first two motions. I think someone else can get a little blood on their hands now.
Councillor Montgomery?
Sure, thank you. All right, so I will move the council give a second reading to bylaw number 24-13, being the 2024 property tax rate bylaw.
Thank you very much, Councillor Montgomery. And now with second reading and a motion on the table, we can open it up for questions, or comments, and debate. Councillor Peterson.
So first of all, I want to start off by thanking this leadership team, this senior leadership team, and all of the people that work with them in bringing options forward to us and working with extraordinary diligence to get it to this rate, because I know it was not an easy task by any stretch of the imagination. And no one can, unless you're living in a very deep hole in this province, understand what's happened to all the municipalities around us in terms of tax rates. We just saw what's happened in the city of Calgary with a 7% plus tax rate. And so when we look at comparable communities around us, our administration and this council have done a very diligent job in trying to stay a course, even though we weren't able to stay the course that we hoped to stay at under 5% or 5.2, at the end. But we have been able to hold the line and maintain services. That's something that our community, through our needs assessment and our community satisfaction surveys, have been utilized and useful for us to know what our community values. So we have been able to maintain services with this budget. I don't know that we'll be able to do that in future budgets and keep the tax rates rational, but that is something for a future date. Today, we have this tax increase before us. We've been able to maintain services. We've taken the surplus that we had in the education tax and applied it to lower the taxes. And I think that we've made the best of a very difficult situation. And this council is committed to continuing on in that realm to keep our taxes as affordable as we possibly can while maintaining the services that our community really values. But we are prepared to make deep cuts in the future in order to maintain tax rates that are palatable. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Are there any other comments, questions, or debate from councillors? Councillor Wagner.
I'm just ready for the next motion.
I think we have a motion on the table
That's
right
right,
now
we
for
do.
second reading that we're still working on, but thank you. I appreciate your enthusiasm. I just want to take a very brief second to thank administration for their work on this and to recognize that between December, when we first discussed property tax rate of 5.2%, till now, we've kept that stable, and that hasn't changed. And just to echo what you've heard from both administration and from my fellow councillors here at the table, this is as a result of a change in provincial and other requisitions that have come towards us. And that's unfortunate, but it's a reality that we're dealing with. So seeing and hearing no other questions or comments, I'm ready to call the question on second reading. All in favor? That has passed unanimously. Councillor Wagner.
I move that council give unanimous consent to give third and final reading bylaw to 24-13 being the 2024 property tax rate bylaw.
All right, with a motion on the table, any comments, questions from any members of council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that has passed unanimously. Wonderful. And I'm looking for another one. Councillor Wagner.
I move that council give third and final reading to bylaw number 24-13 being the 2024 property tax rate bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor Wagner. And one final time, I'm looking for any comments, questions, or debate from councillors. Seeing and hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion is passed unanimously. That brings us on to our newly created Section 14 for the closed meeting. Is someone willing to make a motion for us to go in camera? Oh, Jonathan from administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's actually items under the councillor inquiries and questions section on the agenda. I think there's a notice of motion on the agenda today.
Oh, thank you very much. I apologize. My papers are getting a little messy. So I'm looking in section 12. We're moving on to council information and inquiries. 12.1, questions between councilors and council statements. Seeing and hearing none, we'll move forward.
Sorry. I just wanted to make
Councillor
a
Ray-
statement. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just congratulations to Sacred Heart Parish. That's my home parish. They sent us an invitation to the dedication mass on June 14th. I am just so personally excited. For 16 years, we've been celebrating our mass out of a school gymnasium, and I am just so happy for the parish and looking forward to it. Congratulations.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley. Councillor Montgomery, questions between councillors and council statements?
No, I'll read my notice of motion whenever you're ready.
Oh, all right, well then we'll go to 12.2, 13.2, I think it is now, boards and committee reports. 13.3, question and answer period. Seeing and hearing none. 12.4, administrative inquiries. Also seeing and hearing none. Now we're on 12.5, notices of motion. And Councillor Montgomery, I've got you up for that.
Thank you. The subject of my notice of motion is titled Racial Equality Review. And it says, whereas the town of Strathmore recognizes the inherent dignity and equal rights of all individuals regardless of race, ethnicity, or cultural background, and whereas the town of Strathmore is committed to fostering a community that is inclusive of all, welcoming, and free from racial discrimination, and whereas the town of Strathmore acknowledges the ongoing struggle against racial discrimination and is dedicated to taking proactive steps to combat it, and whereas the town of Strathmore and its council have actively engaged in efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, within our community, and whereas many interpretations and applications of diversity involve the use of racially discriminatory practices and the unequal treatment of people based on their race, ethnicity, or cultural background, and whereas the town of Strathmore condemns all forms of racism and is committed to leading our community to address and eliminate racial discrimination in all its forms, notice is hereby given that the following motion will be brought forward for consideration at the June 5th, 2024 regular council meeting. That will read, be it therefore resolved that council direct administration to review their current systems, policies, and practices to ensure that the town of Strathmore will not consider, inquire about, or use an individual's race, ethnicity, cultural background, or color to determine eligibility for services or grants, or in the provision of services and grants, or in the charging and collection of fees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery, and we'll see that on the June 5th agenda. Moving on, I'm looking for a motion to go in camera to discuss 14.1. Councillor Peterson.
I've moved to go in camera at 10:26 PM.
10:26 PM. We got 4 minutes. We're going to use every
Wait.
second.
Deputy Mayor, I believe Jonathan, I think we need a motion to extend past 10:30. I think your motion was to 10:30. Is that correct, Jonathan?
That is correct.
I would move that we extend till 10:40, and I know there are people here that may not be able to stay. It's just a critical factor. And I know you also have a critical factor, Councillor Ronnie.
Motion's on the table to extend to 10:40. All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. We are extended, moving forward with the
Motion to
go
move in
camera.
camera at 10:27.